I think so. So let's call to order this notice of special meeting and the regular meeting of the Belvedere City Council for March 13, 2023. Can we begin with the call, with the roll call, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Cooper,
Present.
Councilmember Wilkinson,
Present.
Vice Mayor Mark,
Here, thank you.
Mayor Lynch,
Here, thank you.
and for the record, Councilmember Kennitzer is absent tonight.
Thank you. The third item on the agenda is public comment on the closed session agenda item, which is item 4. Do we have anyone here wishing to speak? I don't see anyone. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom wishing to address the public comment on agenda item 4?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm looking over at the attendees and I see no attendees.
Very well, thank you. Let's close this session. We'll adjourn scheduled meeting of the City Council for Monday, March 13. Advice was given in the closed session. There is nothing else to report. Let me turn now to the next item on our agenda, which is reports and presentations. Item 3 is City Council reports. And do any of my colleagues have reports to make, putting aside 3C, which is the Coyote Subcommittee report?
Restart.
Do we call the roll again?
Yeah.
All right, very well, thank you. So we'll call the meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can I ask for the roll call, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Cooper,
Here.
Councilmember Wilkinson,
Present.
Vice Mayor Mark,
Present.
Mayor Lynch.
Yes, here.
For the record, Councilmember Kennitzer is absent.
Thank you. Are there any announcements to make before we proceed?
Thank you, Mayor. If you're a member of the public and have joined today's meeting remotely from a PC, Mac, iPad, or Android device, and your audio will be on mute and your video will be turned off. Should you wish to speak on any item listed on the agenda, including open forum, and are using the Zoom meeting platform, please use the raise hand function, and at the appropriate time, we will unmute your audio and inform you that it is your opportunity to comment. If you have called into the meeting and wish to comment, please press *9 and we will unmute you. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your comments. Please note, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Mayor, council members, there was some information provided to you today, a 1-page sheet, which was printed, and a copy is on the dais, as well as it will be public on the city website, attached to the end of the agenda.
Thank you. Does that conclude any announcements?
That concludes my announcements.
All
Thank
righty,
you.
thank you. Let's turn then to reports and presentations. 3A, City Council reports. Are there any reports under this agenda item? Not seeing any, thank you. Let's turn to item 3B, the City Manager report. Mr. Zadnik.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lynch. I have 2 brief updates. First, I'd like to highlight that the City Council retreat occurred on March 1st. Went well. For those who attended or are not aware, this is a special planning session where staff and council members can come together to discuss a variety of topics that are important to the city and the community, as well as efficient operation of the city. This year, council prioritized action on several initiatives, from improving public-facing communications to budgeting for long-term infrastructure needs, including the critical infrastructure project, to clear building and planning department processes, sustainability, and emergency readiness. Goals were established at this meeting and work is already underway. So please keep an eye out for progress reports that will be coming to City Council as early as May of this year. And then second, I'll point out that the Public Works Department is gearing up for pavement work just as soon as the roads dry out. We already have a contract that includes a few phases of grind and overlay work, patching and resurfacing or slurry sealing of roadways. I want to say that many don't realize it, but the city's single largest dollar value asset is its roadway system. While these annual maintenance projects are noisy and inconvenient, the upkeep of this important asset is critical in expanding the lifespan of our roadways. So thank you for your patience, and that's all I have unless there's questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Robert about the city manager's report? Thank you, Robert. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3C, the Coyote Subcommittee Report. Council members Cooper and Vice Mayor Mark will provide the report.
Thank you. Robert, will you put up a presentation? I'm just curious, do we know how many members are in attendance of on Zoom?
Mayor, council member, yes, looking over at the attendees, I do see 9 attendees. Currently, we have 2 raised hands.
Thank you. Just to update the city council and those in attendance, the Coyote Management Task Force, Councilmember Cooper, myself, Chief Wu, and City Manager have met a few times, and we've had we've progressed. To give you an update, we've been working on our Coyote Management Plan, guidelines, and policies to keep Belvedere residents safe. And within that, we want to touch on a few points this evening: an improved reporting system, a wildlife activity assessment and mapping of our community, and then an update on trapping and removal services, an update, investigation, and potential challenges to that. Next slide, please. Oops, backward, yeah.
We have an overall goal of the Coyote plan, obviously, to create guidelines and necessary policies to keep the residents safe. And after a lot of study and research, the 4 of us have suggested and are proposing that we adopt an approach that would emphasize education, address intentional and unintentional feeding, and a way to train our first responders and citizens in a technique called hazing. One of the things that's important about this overall is that we'll be able to use whatever information we find as we go forward with the ultimate goal of this plan to be fewer conflicts between coyotes, people, and their pets. So.
Thank you. The further on the Coyote Management Plan that's in a draft at this point, there's 3 primary objectives of the plan: focusing on reporting and response, how to improve how sightings encounters are reported, and make a clear schedule of responses, both by the public and what the city will do in reaction to those reports. Public education, as Jane just talked about, increasing awareness on attractants, reshaping coyote behavior, understanding normal versus abnormal coyote behavior, and then engagement, recognizing that public education isn't enough. The city understands that it needs to be proactive within and for the community, providing support, resources, and personnel.
Here we've listed kind of like the overall plan summary. So within the 3 key areas that Peter just talked about, you can see that under reporting and response, we're planning on having a dedicated coyote hotline. We've created and are still working on an incident response matrix. We'd like to have an activity tracking map so we can see actually where the coyotes are. And as far as public education, we are very excited to start creating an area on the website, or on the city website, so that we can start putting information in there and giving information to the citizens. we're hoping to organize workshops and then as we have completed our yard audit checklist and plan on sending that out to the community tomorrow or Wednesday perhaps, so that everyone's able to look at their own property and go through a checklist and see where perhaps inadvertently they're encouraging coyotes to stay in Belvedere. And more training for first responders. And we'd like to also pull together some volunteers in the community as kind of a response team that we can talk about later. But one thing I wanted to highlight here is that these are all areas that the city of Belvedere and the staff and the task force is actively working on. So it's a real partnership between the city and the residents. It's not one portion of only city staff doing all the work or only residents being expected to do everything on their own. So we really feel like this shows a true partnership going on between all the factors in the city.
Thank you. That was an outline of the plan, which we hope to have to the council very soon for review. Touching on a few of the plan items that we're moving forward, and I'll get to towards the end of this, but short of an objection by this council, we're moving forward on these items right away. Setting up a coyote hotline, a dedicated number with an in-person attendant to respond to calls and to elevate appropriately if necessary, but not in all cases to Marin Dispatch. That's been one of the concerns, is that all calls go to Marin Dispatch. As well as a sequenced web reporting form that allows people to report individually, self-report online and get appropriate responses, and likewise elevation should they be deemed necessary. The next thing.
As we've mentioned before, we're planning on having a professional come in and help us actually survey the coyote activities so that we can understand kind of like the who, the where, and the what. You know, who are these coyotes? How many are there? Where are they living? What are they doing here? What are they doing to become behavioral problems, et cetera, finding out where their dens are. And we're hoping to use all the data gathered there as a basis for creating plans. And then it would also be like a baseline of data to which we can then compare afterwards.
And Robert, pause right there a second. We've seen examples, Woodside, Manhattan Beach, Wizard Park, Manhattan Beach, where a relatively quick, a matter of weeks, activity assessment, looking at reports, they're on the ground in investigation and inspection, social media review, looking at coyote evidence, shelter places, attractants, and coming up with a map and very, very accurately determining where these coyotes are coming from, what groups are local, which may be transient, where attractants most likely will be, and identifying real causes of some of the activities. So we're hoping that can come in and really start to inform some of our decisions going forward. The next slide is a brief update on our discussions of lethal removal. As Jane mentioned, we really feel this is a last resort. This is certainly subject to discussion on this council, but as we review it, I do believe, and I did write it this way, and I'll take that responsibility, that I think we do have to prioritize use of non-lethal and preventative strategies to address these coyote-human conflicts. We do understand that a wild coyote can be removed when and if a coyote is injured, sick, or otherwise debilitated, when it has been confirmed through police and animal control that coyote has bitten a human. And point 3 is a actual break from California Fish and Wildlife. This doesn't go as far as they do, but I really do believe we need to have clear understanding that where it has been confirmed through police or animal control that a specific individual coyote or group are displaying extraordinary aggressive behavior towards people, and where the behavior represents an impending risk to public safety, can also be justification for trapping and or removal, or trapping and or removal, not or. We have come across number of constraints, which I wanted to mention. I don't think this is the forum for discussion at this point, but seeker review is a significant issue. It has been, we've been advised that this would most likely be a environmental impact report. It would require an environmental impact report. If we were to proceed without it, claiming an exemption, we would open ourselves up to litigation against suing us over our lack of compliance with SUCA regulations. Obviously, that becomes a time and a cost consideration at that point in time. Effectiveness and cost of removal is something that we also need to really understand and consider. The few examples where this has happened, Torrance, California in particular, they've had 3 years of their trapping and removal seasons, September through May, basically, where they've removed 14, 15, and 28 coyotes in three subsequent years at increasing costs from $80,000 to $85,000 to $100,000 each year of doing so. And their reportings and their sightings are going up. So it's not something that has been proven to be terribly successful at this point in time. Other considerations, county agencies, we've heard from them. Agencies like Project Coyote, Marin Humane have and will voice their concerns and opposition, and certainly citizens as well. Doesn't mean this isn't something to keep on the table, but we are seeing that there are significant obstacles for a public agency to engage an entity to remove coyotes.
And I think going right along with that is that we heard our community loud and clear that this is an urgent issue that's front and center in everyone's minds. And if we had to start going through a CEQA review, we all know how many months that can take. If we were in litigation, if we were fighting the entire county of Marin, which we would be, and a lot of our state agencies as well, and a lot of our state legislators, this would not be a quick response to the community. We do feel, though, that our choices that we've found, and as I said, all the research we've done, that we have an ability to move forward very, very quickly at this point and really address every single concern that people in the community have. And that's, I think that's really key to our goal as well, is speed. Oh, me again. As we learned all about coyotes, we also started learning all about how to respond to them and what people can do. So there's an awful lot that people can do for their personal property. We will be putting all of this into either a workshop format to help people. We'll be training volunteers to help individuals. As I said, we're sending out a yard audit list within the next day or two. And there are tons of options, like fencing options, of putting a coyote roller right at the top of a wooden fence so that it turns out the coyotes don't leap over fences. They actually grab the top of the fence and heave themselves over. So if there's a roller up there that spins, their paws hit it and they can't get any leverage and back they fall. So it's not visually bad. It's just a little roller sitting on top. That works well. We've found a lot of movement triggered water sprinklers, so that if you, and they're not expensive, you set it up, a coyote comes by, it's attached to your water system, and the sprinkler system goes off, and they're caught off guard and off they go. There are a lot of strobe lights that you can purchase that again are predator deterrents and inexpensive, and you can get them all online. So we'll be pulling a lot of that together as well. As I said, the city is already started in looking at vegetation and where potential shelter opportunities on our city property is. And we'll be gathering that information together. And again, the response team, I met with Adam Gavser the other day, and he was quite excited to think about partnering with us. And he's going to be reaching out to his steering committee and planning a way that Peter and I can connect with that organization and work together to figure out if some of the block captains would like to also become Coyote team volunteers. So we're hopeful that that's going to be a great way to keep our whole community working together again, because that's what we're going to need to do to make this successful.
As I mentioned a bit earlier, unless there are some objections raised tonight, we are moving forward with a improved reporting system. We have a contract in hand to begin a wildlife activity assessment and mapping of the city. We're looking to publish and promote, as Jane just talked about, yard audit checklists and have resources available for people to have assistance in doing so. Publish an incident response matrix, so any type of incident, any type of encounter can be reported accurately, and the response will be known by both officials and the people reporting them themselves. And we'd like to bring the Coyote Management Plan to council for review. And just a quick further note on what Jane was talking about as far as the knee-jerk reaction to this would be to hire someone to come in and eliminate these coyotes right away. If that were possible, we would raise that as an option. There are a number of absolute restraints to prevent that from happening immediately and simply. So without eliminating that and without further investigating that moving forward, we are moving forward with aggressive and tried and true methods of reducing human coyote conflict, removing their attractants, removing their shelter in a way so that it's a less habitable place for them to be. And with that, we're open to questions and further comments.
Thank you. Thank you both for the incredible hard work and very detailed presentation, and also for the speed at which you've addressed this and reported back. I think we're all very, very grateful. I had just a couple of questions. With respect to the wildlife activity assessment and mapping, I think Vice Mayor Mark, you said you had a contract in hand, looking ready to move forward. Do you have a sense for when that effort could begin and how long it would take?
I believe March 20th.
March 20th.
1 week from today.
Is when it would start, and then how long would that program take?
2 or 3 weeks, I believe. And it's assessment of our reports. It's on location, a few evenings with equipment, social media, personal interviews if necessary, and using their experience to in a sense create a physical map of the location with sighting locations and hypotheses of where these coyotes are coming from, living and migrating throughout the island, throughout the community.
That's terrific. Thank you. Another question is with respect to the improved reporting system. I think everyone recognizes that the data that we encourage people to contact the police department with did not yield a full set of all the reporting and incidents. But a lot of that was because the phone calls weren't being made. Some people were concerned that there were just so many sightings it would have been sort of pointless. That's one of the comments we heard. So the question I have, I appreciate the ideas about what new mechanical reporting systems we can have. Do we have any concern that we're going to have a compliance problem of getting our residents and neighbors to participate in a way that gathers all the data we need?
Go ahead.
Well, there's an interesting, we've heard from two sides of the aisle here. The folks who do the activity mapping and assessment want every coyote sighting, every coyote encounter reported, because that gives them more data to work on. The Marin Humane Project Coyote folks don't want sightings reported. They think that adds to public hysteria, that adds to an over reporting of coyote activity, of normal coyote activity. So if a coyote is walking down the street at dusk, that's not an abnormal situation. They don't want that reported. So we've been trying to figure out where we go on this. I think we'll end up asking for any and all reported sightings, coyote activity reported going in, try to promote that to get as much data as we possibly can and to give our public officials the ability to later discern what are more relevant and what not relevant. We don't want to dissuade people from doing it.
And I'm not quite sure how, we don't know yet how long the hotline would even be, available. I mean, it could be that we just need intense data over the next couple of months. And then, we've also learned that coyote activity is seasonal. And so you are going to see where coyotes are more active at some times during the year and then less active other times during the year. And I know that Chief Wu reported that from January to February, we had 50% fewer sightings called in so January was double what February was, and March looks like to be even less. I mean, we can guess that people are not out walking their dogs as much because the weather hasn't been conducive, and most likely they're not leaving food out because of the same reason. So it could be that they're just not around right now. It could be the weather. We don't know. But I think we feel like for the next couple of months, it's important to gather as much data as we can.
Thank you. One last question is about the Torrance example, which I've read about and which you mentioned, where they've been trapping for at least 3 years and spending 85 to 100 grand a year and yielding some coyote in those traps, but not curtailing their problem. Do they have, in addition to a trapping process, to the city of Torrance have a wildlife management program like the one that we're proposing to develop?
Not as much. Their city council in 2018 pretty much was turned over on a trapping and removing coyotes 24/7, 365. That was their approach. And they started that almost immediately with no coyote management plan and no effort. Coupled with the problems of discharge laws and Title 14 CCR Section 465, which prohibits trapping within 150 yards of a private home without consent, which is California law. So they had to trap in an industrial area and actually baited and drew coyotes out into that area, which wasn't very effective anyway. And there was some debate whether they were drawing the coyotes who were causing a problem or other coyotes from other communities. So all that brings up just the effectiveness is there's no rhyme or reason. And in the few cases where it's happened, there's been very little success in reducing encounters or even sightings. The one case which we all spoke about back east in Massachusetts, they've gone radio silent as far as their activities. Combination of they don't want it to be public, and they're also now being investigated by their own environmental agencies in Massachusetts for lack of compliance with
That town of
environmental
Nahant,
impact.
that-
Yeah. So that's a consideration. We've had some conversation with our city council about that. That's something not to be taken lightly, that it will probably not be an exempt activity.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a couple. Can we go back to the slide that had lethal control on it? I just wanted to clarify a couple of things.
And Peter, didn't the Torrance City Council then vote to disband that whole thing?
No, they voted 4-1 to keep it.
Oh,
The
they
one
did.
dissenting vote was their mayor,
The
who
mayor
actually
voted.
brought it to them originally and just voted no on it for
Right.
lack of effectiveness.
Right.
So I just wanted to make sure, I think it's important to, there seems to be a distinction here. So the first elements here that are describing circumstances under which coyotes can be trapped and removed, this is just specific incidences, as opposed to the pieces at the bottom are related to you implementing a full
Broader,
program.
yes.
So they're two separate things. Okay.
Well, it's a,
So I think what you're
yeah,
saying.
I'm not being completely clear about that. If item 1 or 2 were to happen, California Fish and Wildlife would come in and Most likely, I say most likely because they haven't completely, because local jurisdictions have stopped them even in those cases.
So would just remove the specific.
They would do it, make every attempt to remove that specific coyote was injured or if it had bitten or scratched a human, according to as we heard the other night.
Right.
But even in those cases, that's not always absolute. Jurisdictions can override them and stop them, preventing them from doing that. County and county resources. The third one would be a case, and we talked about this being a gray area between what we consider public safety issue and what California Fish and Wildlife considers a dangerous animal to human. And that would be a situation where a coyote was particularly aggressive towards a human, maybe involved a pet, that a human got involved, and it didn't elevate to the point of a bite or a scratch, but it was clearly a situation where we wanted to do something about it. In that case, we would have to engage someone to do that other than Fish and Wildlife, whether it's USDA or a private contractor to do so. In that case, in that case, the challenge is what we would face.
Okay, so it's more in the case of a more gray area incident, or in the case of us just wanting to implement
Yes, a broader scale.
an overlay program, which would be incredibly challenging legally, time-wise, and probably wouldn't be effective in achieving the objective. Okay, that's what I wanted to
I think
clarify.
we have to always keep in mind that this isn't just a short-term fix. We're also looking at long-term, because of the seasonality and because we are so close to Tiburon, it's not as if most likely coyotes are coming from Tiburon, and we want our city to be ready. We want to be prepared for long-term. And we believe that education and training, et cetera, all the components that we mentioned before are the way that long-term our community will be able to handle this. So any new coyote that happened to walk across Tiburon Boulevard would not be welcome here, and hopefully would turn around and go back to the proper open space where they belong.
Okay, thanks. So another question I had was in relation to, because it sounds like the objective here isn't even necessarily to reduce the population of coyotes in Belvedere, it's just to reduce the interaction with humans. And it could be that our coyote population is sustainable on other food sources that we cannot remove.
Well, it's exactly that. It's recognizing that no matter what we end up doing, there's going to be coyotes here. We need to remove the attractants and the available food sources that bring them in contact with humans. That's the message we've been hearing over and over again, that there's plenty of food sources out there for them. They will opt for easier food sources should they be available. And people have been very clear with us that there are obviously very easy food sources available for you, and shelter. That's why they are coming in contact with humans. And those food sources aren't dogs. I mean, those are incidental and tragic and something we need to try to eliminate. But it's the availability of other food sources that are bringing them in close contact and making the coyotes brave enough and habituated to living and approaching humans in the way that they have.
They wind up seeing us as an easy food source
providers,
for
yeah.
providing them with food. And they don't understand if it's me walking or Peter walking, why, Peter's been feeding them at his house and I come over to his house. They may look as if they're going to come up toward me because they expect me to now feed them as well. So what we've learned is a lot of it is human behavior that needs to be changed, not just animal behavior. So again, it's going to be a partnership.
Yeah, and let me be clear about this. If there was a clear path to reducing the number of coyotes, we put it on the table for discussion. I'm not saying I endorse that or I support that, because I really do, as Jane just said, think that it's the attractions and the shelter that is causing these problems. But if there was a clear path, I believe we put on the table for this community to discuss and decide upon, but there's not a clear path to getting there. A clear, simple, effective path to get there.
And this is just because I don't quite understand. Can you explain a little bit more how those activity assessments work practically?
Practically, Humane Wildlife Control, I believe that's their name, Robert. That's the agency we're speaking of working with, would come in. We would sign a contract, which I believe is under $5,000 initially, something like that. I believe that initial engagement is under $5,000. Yeah. And they would survey the area physically. I mean, get surveys and get maps, topographical maps, look at all the reports that we have, lay those out, do a deep dive into social media, try to track where those cases are, follow up with individual people, ask questions, do their own investigation, denning sites, shelter areas, looking for evidence of coyote activity, spend a couple of evenings and a couple of days in and around the community. They asked everybody in the community, they looked at it on Google Maps to come up with a proposal to try to give us a very clear sense of what it looks like. And what we saw from Manhattan Beach was, stars and different icons where encounters were, paths and routes where they were speculating that coyotes were traveling from known areas to the locations around the city. And they sort of mapped them and showed certain areas where there were most likely attractants, and then did investigations, in fact found locations where there were attractions, construction sites, people actually feeding them. Construction sites are a big attraction to coyotes, because after construction sites close, there's a lot of food lying around, open garbage containers and so forth, which brings coyotes in. So do those investigations and give us a sense of what it looks like, try to eliminate those and assess again.
Okay, I mean, I think this has been an education. And thank you to both of you, obviously, but I think it's going to be very important to try and communicate this to the community that has a very different perspective
Yeah,
right now.
yeah.
And so I think that's a really important piece of this.
Yeah, I want to say thanks again. I also want to echo the point from Council Member Wilkinson just now. The letter that went out originally after our original county meeting with the community, I thought was extremely important and timely. I think this report has been incredibly helpful. If it's possible to provide updates in advance of our next meeting, April 10, through additional letters to the community, I think that would be quite critical to demonstrate both that we're moving along very quickly, but also giving updates, substantive updates that will help the community understand where we're going.
And I think if we, which we're hoping to do, go ahead and work with this group, that they also provide an awful lot of educational materials for us that we'll be able to share. I'm hoping she has some really great videos. I'm hoping we'd be able to add those videos to our website and let people know that they can actually listen and learn themselves. And like we said, Peter and I are working on a lot of documents that we will be getting out to the community as soon as we can.
Yeah, and Sally, your point's well taken, that the community, I think may have had it up to here with education at some point, and we hear that, and that's why I think the better reporting and the assessment are key next steps to inform where we go, and so we can have a clear case of what's going to happen, so we can, recognizing that coming in and removing coyotes right away is a very challenging option, that we can do everything we can do to eliminate, as you mentioned, those attractants in the shelters, to see if that can move the needle. We are hopefully at the end of this current season from a coyote activity perspective, as far as most people have experienced. So it will give us a good opportunity to get these all lined up for next fall as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you both again very much. We really appreciate it. If there's nothing more to,
I'm just wondering if there's any public comment, if that's part of this process.
It is part of the process. I think we have one or two hands raised, Tisha. Sure.
If it's okay, Mayor
please.
Lynch, just very briefly, I just want to underline one point that Vice Mayor Mark made at the outset of this discussion. That is that this plan is currently in a draft form. While we certainly look forward to adopting it in final form, we are still in the information gathering stage. The city has not made any final decisions on this front. And very much appreciate the committee's work and also look forward to hearing from the public as well. But just did want to
Yeah.
underline the current status of where we
Absolutely.
are.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we'll call now for public comment. Is there anyone here in the room who would wish to address the report that was just concluded? Not seeing anyone. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom with their hand raised?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking over at the attendees, I do see 2 raised hands. Once again, if you joined the meeting remotely, we ask that if you wish to speak, you select the raise hand icon to speak. And if you've called into the meeting, we ask that you press *9 if you wish to speak. When unmute, please identify yourself for the record. And once again, public comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Going over to the attendee side, and I will be unmuting Mr. Rothman.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. I have a comment about this, but first I have a question to the mayor. Mr. Mayor, do you realize that at the end of the Mr. Zadnik's city manager report, you immediately moved on to this item without a time for public comment? I believe that the city manager's report is an agendized item, and therefore it's required by the Brown Act to provide an opportunity for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. I believe you're correct. And we can correct that and go back and do public comment, I presume, with respect to that agenda item. If you'd like to address that now, well, actually, why don't you address item 3C, and then we'll go back and do that. Thank you.
Okay, now, an item, I don't have the agenda up because I have the Zoom on my screen. It's the coyote to discuss, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I want to express my appreciation as a resident to the hard work that the council members put in on this. However, I'm sorry to feel that it's going not to go anyplace. I originally was thinking, oh, we'll get rid of the coyotes. I don't have, it was not of great concern, but I thought that would take place. But the practical aspects, Councilperson Mark, I believe it was at the meeting that he and Ms. Cooper had for community input. I'm pretty sure I heard him say, you cannot eliminate coyotes by eliminating places for them to stay. And I thought about that, and I realized that where I live, the whole west side of Belvedere, from the end of forgive me, you know what I'm speaking, the road along the shore there, shoreline, the shore road, all the way out, probably half a mile, is all vegetation. West Shore Road is all vegetation. I know there's vegetation below me, and every house on Cliff Road has vegetation below it. So I think it's just fine to put in the effort. It's important to put in the effort to, you know, of course, effort has to be put in even to show if something won't work. But I think this is a problem without an answer. I don't think people are dumping their garbage all over the place. I'm quite sure they're not. And I think there's going to be habitat, and even not on city property, but on private property, vacant lots, etc., and private property down by the water. So I do wish that everybody could be made happy out of what's going to happen. But I have a feeling it's going to end up with the pet owners really having to take, I don't want to say better care, but to do whatever is necessary to protect their pets. I would ask, though, whether if people want to kill the coyotes on their own property, whether they can have someone come in and say, I've got a pest, and trap it and then not shoot it, but euthanize it with chemicals, or have a pest control person do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. Do we have any other hands raised on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. I will go over and unmute Ava.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'm intrigued by Mr. Rothman's comment because it stood out to me at the last meeting on coyotes that a lot of people were very eager to trap the coyotes and kill them. And it didn't seem to have crossed anyone's mind that there have been programs of trapping coyotes and neutering / spaying them. And since the pupping appears to be, the denning appears to be some sort of issue, that might be one approach. I'd also like to point out that I think to most outside observers and also to a lot of people who live in Belvedere and who have lived in Belvedere for a long time and who didn't feel like coming up against a TV celebrity who's funded by Charles Koch, namely Mike Rowe, Brian Davis, a failed city council candidate, and a bunch of ex-McKinsey, ex-Goldman Sachs guys, they may have been a little intimidated, but not everybody is terrified of coyotes in Belvedere. I know that because I went and interviewed people there. I do want to point out that there's been very little proof justifying any sort of demand for snipers. It's a kind of mass panic. And I also want to point out, there's an inconsistency. On the one hand, these extremely wealthy people in Belvedere who are very isolated and very sheltered are insisting that coyotes are dangerous and a hazard to pets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every year, the county does a count of unhoused people in the county, and it's always an undercount. I think their last count was like 830 people. This vastly undercounts unhoused people who stay hidden. But with that large number of people, many of them elderly, many of them veterans, many of them women, very, very small, frail people, living often alone in the hills, in various wooded areas, in whatever the whatever the environment. This entire county has coyotes, and we have not one incident of any of these people being attacked, as far as I know. And certainly, Brian Davis has not made any claim that this has happened. So I think you need to take a harder look at some of these demands that your litigious residents are making and their threats to sue, because the threat does not appear to be substantial. And if it is magically appearing in Belvedere and not in other parts of Marin County, that does imply that there is something wrong, something off in either how Belvedere residents are viewing the issue, or perhaps something that they need to change in their patterns. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other hands raised on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking over at the attendees, there are no other hands.
Thank you. We'll close the public comment. I want to go back and correct an oversight from earlier and invite public comment on agenda item 3B, the city manager's report. Is there anyone here in the room who would like to address that agenda item? I'm not seeing anyone, Madam Clerk. Do we have anyone on Zoom with their hands raised to address item 3B?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking over at the attendees, I see 2 raised hands. We'll go over and unmute Mr. Rothman.
Thank you very much. You can hear me, yes? Okay, good. Because the city council did not record the retreat, and I couldn't stay all day, I'm basing my reaction to the city manager's portrayal of what took place based upon the report in the ARC. And I was disappointed with respect to the discussion of the project, the seismic flood project, because when I read what the city council people had said, there was a real divergence between what Sally Wilkinson said, which was, I'm going to paraphrase, We just didn't convince them. We have to educate the public. We have to convince them that that it's a very important thing to do, and that they just didn't want to pay for it in that way. On the other hand, and I think that's a mistake, mistaken perspective, Peter Mark was much more, in my opinion, much more thoughtful. And when he spoke of we have to do education, I realized that he was really saying that the council has to be open to being educated, because he pointed out that there are people who felt that the plan was the wrong plan. It wasn't just a question of the financing. And he urged that the community be listened to. I would like to point out to you that the last community meeting on the project took place in 2019. There was no community meeting after that. What we had instead was City Hall saying, we've met with stakeholders. Well, apparently they haven't met with me, but apparently there were many people who felt that they were stakeholders and either had been met with and were not convinced, or had never been met with and were probably resentful about not having been met with. So I would urge that the city council arrange for community meetings, open community meetings, where people can voice them as they did in 2019. I often felt after that because at that meeting, the public that didn't live by the lagoon said, well, if it's a flood problem, then let the lagoon people pay for it. We don't have the trouble. We don't have the problem. We shouldn't have to pay for it. That it's like undergrounding. So as I say, I would urge that attention be given to Peter Mark's approach. And I'm sorry to say, I think that Sally Wilkinson is really out of touch with what the public expressed in the recent election. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other hands raised?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll go over and unmute Ava.
Thanks. I just wanted to let the city manager know that it is really important that the very small city of Belvedere, which I understand has gone through some change lately, that it makes sure that all of its minutes and other records are properly made available to the public. And I know it can be hard, and I talked to the city clerk about this. I understand her situation, but it's important that those records are available. Certainly, video recordings of the meeting should be easily downloaded from the site, and I recommend MP4. That's easiest, but it's also, another way you can do it is just to provide audio or to provide both of them on the website. I know that you've fallen a little bit behind on minutes, and the city clerk is now trying to catch up with that. So that's good. And I wanted to thank city staff for because the file for the Coyote special meeting on coyotes was so cumbersome that I wanted to thank the city staff for making a file for me. I made a 48-mile bike trip in the cold to go and pick that up, and one of your officers was nice enough to hold it for me on the weekend, and I was able to get it and download it. I did want to let you know for your records that I have written a summary of that meeting, and you can access that at marincountyconfidential.substack.com. And it's a very interesting meeting. There was a lot that wasn't explained during that meeting, and so that's some additional context. Some of the backgrounds of the people who are involved, some of their motivations, and then serious omissions of fact with regard to the claims that were being made, lack of evidence, that sort of thing. So that's all available in that article, and I look forward to seeing what happens with the Coyote subcommittee. I do want to remind you that for most of the rest of the Bay Area, the plight of these very wealthy Belvedere residents going absolutely ape over a couple of coyotes is really, it's a spectacle. And it is my most respectful advice that you take a long look at that video. The residents of Belvedere should really take the time to review the video that's available from the city of the Coyote meeting, and really think about if the people who spoke, from Brian Davis to Bruce Bly to Mike Rowe, if those people really represent the city of Belvedere, and if they do, if maybe you want to temper your messages just a teeny tiny bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other hands raised on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. There is no other raised hands.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll close the public comment on agenda item 3B, and we'll move on to agenda item 4, the consent calendar. Are there any comments or questions from the city council on any of the agenda items?
The only one is the minutes of November 14th for me. I wasn't on the councilman.
So
So I don't know if that.
we can ask our council, Mr. Shen, so she can vote on everything other than that agenda item. Is that correct?
Yes, she can also vote on the minutes for November 14th if
okay.
you wish to do so, but if you don't want to, I understand.
Well, I attended it. I just wasn't on the council. So.
But yeah, you can vote on that. item as
Okay.
well.
All right. Any other questions or comments about the consent calendar? Not seeing any. I would like to remove from the consent calendar item 4C, which is the January 24 item. I just had a couple of very brief comments that I thought I'd like to add to those minutes with discussion of our fellow council members. But with that, and I have to ask about. Okay, hang on one second, please. Thank you. I was going to ask about public comment on this agenda item. And Mr. Butler, could you please come forward and tell us your name and address? Thank you.
I can address that if there's a question.
Please.
This is related to the tax pass-through, property tax collected by Belvedere residents by the county and then passed through once it's received. Once Belvedere takes possession of that from the county, it's then passed through to the library.
All right. Do we have any questions for Mr. Zadnik or anyone about the consent item 4A, the warrants, and particularly the question Mr. Butler raised? I don't see any. Does anyone on the council want to remove that item from the consent calendar? All right, not seeing any. Let me continue with public comment on this agenda item 4. Does anyone else here in the room wish to address the consent calendar? I don't see any one interested. Do we have anyone on Zoom with their hand raised?
Thank you, Mayor. I do see one raised hand. I'm going to go over and unmute Mr. Rothman.
Thank you. I just want you to know that the podium microphone is not working.
Thank you. Does that conclude your comment?
Yes, but could someone make the podium microphone work? So we couldn't hear Mr. Butler.
We will endeavor to get a microphone over there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other hands raised on Zoom for this agenda item 4?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking over at the attendees, there are no other raised hands.
All right, then we'll close the public comment and I'll entertain a motion with respect to the consent calendar excluding item 4C.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Can we call the roll, please?
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkinson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mark,
Yes, thank you.
Mayor Lynch.
Yes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted 4-1 with Councilmember Ken Mixer absent.
Is it 4-1 or is it 4-0 with one absent?
Correction, Mayor, it's 4-0 with one absent, Councilmember Ken Mixer absent.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on now to agenda item 5, the public hearings. And I believe we begin with the item from the consent calendar 4C that was pulled off. I'm not sure we need to have this introduced. Let me just flag for my fellow council members my concern. These are the minutes of the January 24 meeting that led to the vote and approval on the housing element update. And if we look at page 2 of those minutes, item 4A, under the bolded paragraph motion, it refers to a motion that was made by Councilmember Kennitzer and then identifies some amendments. And then those are reported below that. And on the top of the next page, I thought for good order, it would be important to note that the resolution that was proposed included other revisions that had been noted by council and agreed upon and were in the record and were recorded in that. So I propose that we revise that second line to simply insert the language that says adopting the resolution with, and then we'll add the language, revisions noted by city council during the recorded meeting, including the following language amendments. And so that is my suggestion. I understand mechanically it was necessary to pull that off of consent in order to make that revision. And I invite any questions or comments or pushback on that.
That makes sense.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. We'll open public comment on this item. Is there anyone here who wish to address the item? Not seeing anyone. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at the attendees, 6 attendees, no raised hands.
All righty, thank you. Can I entertain a motion for this agenda item?
I propose we approve the minutes of the January 24th, 2023 special city council meeting with the language Mayor Lynch described in the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Can we call the roll, please?
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkinson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mark,
Yes.
Mayor Lynch.
Yes.
The ayes have it. The motion is adopted 4-0 with Councilmember Ken Mixer absent.
All right, thank you. We'll continue now with the public hearings. The originally agendized item 5A concerns an appeal of construction time limit penalties assessed to the project at 300 Bella Vista. Can we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mayor and Council. This item on the agenda is an appeal of the construction time limit penalties for 300 Bella Vista Avenue. A building permit for this project was approved on June 26, 2019 for the demolition of an existing garage and reconstruction of the garage, which included a 410 square foot ADU addition. The project was given a 12-month timeline for completion based on the project valuation at that time. Work on the project proceeded, and about 8 months later, on February 11th, 2020, a CTL extension application was received. Given the project site constraints and other difficulties, the CTL committee, comprised of city staff, agreed to approve a 6-month extension for the project, which established a new project deadline of December 26, 2020. The project also qualified for COVID-19 relief under California Assembly Bill 1561. Among other things, AB 1561 extended the life of housing entitlements by 18 months. The contractor requested this extension, which was granted, further extending the timeline by 18 months. The new project deadline after this happened was June 26, 2022. Fast forwarding several months, the city sent a 30-day grace period letter on July 11th, 2022, which is attachment 3 in the staff report. To fully close out the project, both the building and planning departments must perform a final inspection. By September 30th of 2022, both these inspections were completed and the CTL timeline was ended. With the extension, the project was 48 days past the approved CTL deadline. This corresponds to a $28,000 penalty. Shortly after issuing the CTL notice, the city received a formal appeal of the fines. That appeal is attachment 5 in the staff report. The appeal cites several reasons for the project proceeding beyond the deadline. A full list is summarized in the staff report. Most notably is the property owner's lack of knowledge about the CTL expiration, considering they were out of the country and had not received the city's mailed notice. Also, the primary contractor experienced a major medical event and wasn't able to complete the project. And then finally, the project was substantially completed by 2022 with no construction activity occurring past the CTL deadline. Belvedere Municipal Code Section 20.04.035 allows the city council to affirm, reduce, or remove the penalty if it determines that the time limit was exceeded for reasons beyond the control of the applicant. In reviewing the appeal, city staff concluded that several of the construction delays were caused by reasons outside of the applicant's control. Furthermore, the intent of the CTL code is to minimize the impact of construction projects on the surrounding neighborhood. With no construction occurring after the CTL deadline, it is the argument of the appellant that the impact of the project was minimal and penalties are not warranted. After reviewing the encroachment permit log history and the building inspector log history, the CTL Appeals Committee agreed that minimal to no work was taking place after the deadline. The applicant states that the total days of work beyond the CTL deadline do not surpass 10 days. This would result in a CTL penalty totaling $6,000. It is council's discretion to affirm, deny, or modify the recommendation of penalties provided by the CTL committee. And with that, I'm open to questions. And I will add that unfortunately, the city's building official, Brian Van Son, is not available tonight for questions. I think he has the most in-depth knowledge about the administrative record for this project, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that might come up.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Mr. Zadnik at this time?
On anything in what you read or?
With respect to the staff report, I think the handout that we got on the dais here, if you had questions about that, you could probably go ahead and address them also to Mr. Zadnik.
I think my question is actually in, I mean, I know it's in the staff report. So there were definitely a lot of dates and I tried to organize it and keep track of it. But the one that jumped out at me that I didn't understand at all was, I think on August 18th, our building head of building did authorize and finish the permit for that house, that home. It's on page 2, halfway down. It says the building department conducted a final inspection. And then later on, it says that planning didn't do their final okay until I think it was September 20th.
30th.
So what happened to 6 weeks there? If building okayed it, why would it take 6 weeks for planning to finish it? It seemed, I just didn't understand that time frame. Nothing's mentioned in there about what was going on for those 6 weeks, or when, I guess it's a process question. So if building actually signs off, do they tell planning they signed off so the planning can finish it?
That's my understanding. Of course, we know both of those inspections have to take place before we can halt the CTL
Right.
deadline, timeline. I would maybe, since Brian isn't here on that
Yeah.
question, I'd potentially defer that to the
Okay,
appellant or the appellant's attorney to answer. They may have some more intimate knowledge about that.
okay.
Thank you. Other questions?
Can I just ask what this is that we've just been handed?
This is a late correspondence item from the appellant's attorney.
Okay.
I know Brian's not here, but would you agree that the items that separated the building department approval on August 18th, and the planning approval on September 30th was a small wire deer fence and frosted glass in 2 outside light fixtures.
That sounds reasonable, yes.
Mhm.
I know that's comes from the appellant, but would the city concur that those are the things, items that were outstanding?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions of Mr. Zadnik at this time? I did have a couple of quick questions, although my colleagues have raised most of them. It's correct, isn't it, that the full penalty that's identified in the staff memo of $28,800 is 48 days?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And the delay between when the 30-day grace period letter went out and when the appellant says they received it, which was August 24, that's 44 days, according to my calendar. Does that sound right?
Yes.
All right. And does the city take any issue with the appellant's statement that they did not receive the grace letter dated July 11, that they did not receive that until August 24?
I don't think the city takes issue with that. I think that from our perspective, the letter was served. It's the property owner's responsibility to forward mail if they are away on vacation or traveling.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had. And if there are no other questions, can we hear from the appellant or representative?
Can you grab the mic? Switch.
Thank you. Okay. Ready? Oh, thank you.
Please.
Thank you. Thank our city manager and staff. We're very pleased with, we got more than one here. Thank you. This one? Okay. So it doesn't. Thank you. Thank you. I really do appreciate the time that the city staff has put into this. After it's all over, whichever way it turns out, I'd like to make some recommendations that city staff in the future may not have to spend this amount of time. But getting to the point specifically in this particular case, one of the questions was asked by a council member was the last minute summary that you received today. The city did have that when the appeal hearing took place. I apologize for my computer failure and my computer skills, but that was cut and pasted at the last minute. Basically, we're here because we believe that the purpose of the ordinance was, initially what it was, established back in the 1990s and to this day, is to motivate people to complete their construction on time. And in this particular case, there was no construction literally after April of 2022, and the time limit expired at the end of June. This is not in disagreement with what anything was said by our city manager. It's simply a question of notice. And the city municipal code provides for a very specific way in which notice is given and how it's implemented. And as was said earlier, we're dealing with two small watt frosted bulbs to be changed out for glass of frosted glass, which is approximately 10, 12 inches by 4 or 5 inches. And a deer fence, which took about half a day or less to wrap up and put in the garage. So the actual work that was done, aside from those bulbs and glass and fence, this matter would have been held between Irene and the owners on August 24th or 5th, whenever they spoke. I think it was on the, I forget the exact date, I have to look at my notes. But basically what happened is Mr. Bauer called the city, left a note because the order that he finally received said, call the city if you have any questions. He spoke to Ms. Miller and said, the construction has been completed. What's this all about? I think there's a mistake. She said Brian wasn't there and he'll get in touch. I'll pass the word. That never happened. By simple chance, Irene ran into the construction person on the job in another construction job. And she said, oh, by the way, that's, a project there is not finalized. And that's what started the whole process. Steve called her, I think the next day, and that's when they agreed that the only two things remaining to be done, to be quote unquote finalized, were those two items I just mentioned. So there's no construction here. There was no disturbance for neighbors. In fact, there was nobody living at the house. They were trying to market it. They believed, I think rightly so, that everything that needed to be done had been done before the house was put on the market, I believe in the beginning of April. Additionally, I believe there was an inspection that occurred sometime in March to sign off on whatever needed to be signed off on. But the final inspection apparently was not done until August 18th, which was mentioned earlier. But the real issue here, and this is really a notice case, in my opinion, because our code, our municipal code specifically states how the sequence of events is to occur. And it says specifically, this is section 1.14.040C, which was also given to the city. This is not the first time that it's in the record, but it begins by saying, where service by mail upon the property owner is unsuccessful, a copy of the order shall be conspicuously posted at the property which is the subject of the order, close quote. Well, the cart was put before the horse here. What happened is the certified mail was sent out. There was no return of the certified mail. There was no proof that it was received. And I'll speak on that in a minute later. Instead, the order, it's a real order, was posted on the same day that the letter was sent and put in the mail. As the compliance order, according to the proof of service, however, according to a neighbor who was, it was also said posted, they never saw it. But that's really beside the point. The point is that the process that the city's established for itself was to send out a 30-day grace period. This particular property owner really never had the satisfaction of that 30 days because it was not received in a timely manner. And additionally, make another point here. When the 30 days expired on the city's desk, the next thing went out was the penalty. They counted out the penalty time and a large penalty went out. Fortunately, a neighbor saw that posted on the garage and took a picture and was sent to Mr. Bauer, and he responded quickly. But the issue is that the city used the same method of communicating with the owner, even after they knew that the first way of communication did not reach the owner, and why it did not reach the owner. And at that point, I'd like to say for future reference, maybe people should use email. You have an ability to protect the city because it can be checked to see whether it's received or not. But the code specifically says after that first attempt to contact without success, then the second, the order has to then be placed on the garage. In other words, you send the certification, you send the order on the garage if you're not able to contact, communicate with, or have proof of that first 30 days. Again, where service by mail upon the prior property owner is unsuccessful, a copy of the order shall be conspicuously posted at the property, which is the subject of the order. And again, the importance of that, I think, was shown in this case because of the second time making the same attempt at communication through the means in which it was not successful the first time. We're endorsing, we're not questioning the validity of the process, we're actually endorsing it. We just do not think it was complied with in this case. That's a technical argument. But the substance of the argument is simply, given the de minimis, what had to be done, minor changes, we believe that either, the ordinance was not to penalize, the ordinance was to achieve a purpose. And we believe that giving a penalty in this case is being penalized of property owners who've been compliant in every respect. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Do you have any questions? For Mr. Johnson this time?
No, thank you.
I'm sorry, I did have one or two. In the appeal process in January of this year,
Yes.
was there any discussion of the failure or was there any discussion from the city that it had received proof that the mail, the 30-day notice letter had been received? Was it sent registered mail?
No, it was not. And I researched the file after the appeal was filed, and I saw none.
So maybe I didn't ask the question. Was it sent registered mail to your understanding?
There's a copy in the file that says it was sent registered mail.
Okay, but then there was no proof of receipt of that
Correct.
in the city's file?
Not to my knowledge, and it was not contended that there was at the hearing.
All right. Was there a discussion at that hearing with respect to the responsibility of the contractor or ultimately the owner to make sure that they've received the sign-offs? The timeline here refers to most of the work being done by January or certainly by April, and then the house is listed and there's an open house for sale on April 6th, I think. And there was just it's asserted in the papers, there was an understanding or a belief that there was a sign off and that everything had been done. Was there a discussion at that appeal hearing about the responsibility to obtain those sign offs?
My memory is the only discussion was the fact that the second contractor was brought on board after the first contractor had a very serious illness, and it took them some time to be able to obtain a second contractor. I believe we're going back now. Well, I don't want to take anything off the top of my head, but it was around the time of the pandemic and the difficulty of finding a contractor. I believe that was the discussion, but our city manager is here and he attended the meeting, so he can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Johnson? Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open the public comment on this agenda item? Is there anyone in this room who wishes to address this agenda item? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom with a raised hand?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking over at the attendees, I do see one raised hand. We'll go over and unmute Mr. Rothman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I found this difficult to follow, both in the staff report when I read it, but I think the person who spoke just now at the podium, right at the very beginning, he said what I think is the only important thing. He said the work was completed within the time. He said the work was completed, I believe he said in April, or which was before the expiration time, at least as I understand it. Now, if indeed that is the truth, then so far as I think residents of Belvedere would be concerned, that is the end of the story. If that's challenged, say, oh, no, sorry, technically, you're over time and we're going to punish you, even though the work was done and the intent of the law and the intent of the regulations were carried out. We're still going to punish you because that I was not dotted and that T was not crossed. And what happens from that kind of approach is the respect with which we would all hope that the council is held by the public dies by 1,000 cuts. It's what I speak of as the love-hate relationship that the council sometimes seems to feel towards some residents. And I would urge you, I'm not sure if indeed the work was done, that's the end of the story, so far as I think average residents would feel justice would dictate. And the question of decreasing it from 28,000 to 6,000, if indeed the work was done, that's the end of the story. It isn't 6,000, it's nothing. And if my understanding is correct, and please correct me if my understanding is not correct, that the work was done, then I would urge you not to impose any penalty whatsoever. As I say, petty bureaucratic approaches do not endear City Hall to the residents of this city, and it reflects on other things that the people vote on, etc. So please consider, if indeed I'm correct in my understanding, not imposing any penalty whatsoever. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. There's no other public comment.
Thank you. We'll close the public comment and bring it back to council for discussion. Vice Mayor Mark, may I start with you?
Sure. I'm a little confused about one thing, which, can I ask the city manager a question? Is that possible?
Yes.
Just that if the July 11th letter was sent and not received, was it also posted on that same day as Mr. Johnson said, or was it posted subsequently to not receiving confirmation that the letter was received?
Yeah, it's a good question. The information I'm going off is what's listed on the letter itself, which says posted on the job site with the date of July 11th, 2022.
Mm-hmm. That doesn't seem consistent with our policy to send it out and only post it if it's not received.
Right.
Right, okay. Thank you. Certainly, it does seem the work was completed by April, and that's valid. Not to disagree with Dr. Rothman, but I don't think that's the end of the story. I think that's there is broader perspective involved. I think it is the applicant's responsibility to understand and comply with the conditions of their permit, which means closing out the permit, getting the appropriate approvals and getting the appropriate sign-offs by all relevant parties. And that if work is considered complete by the contractor and or the homeowner, that doesn't mean all the planning entitlements were met. In this case, clearly very small and non-significant, but in other cases, I think they can be significant. So I think that's where the intent of the policy lies, to motivate the completion of the project, but to also ensure that planning entitlements and the full execution of conditions of the permit are met. But I do think the distinction and the identification of the significance here is valid. Certainly the reduction is warranted. If we're going with a logic of reduction by the time of days, 10 days seems extreme for the work being done, if that's the logic. So I would err, if that's our logic for reducing the fee, I mean, it seems like a day and a half worth of work, basically, if that. But certainly hear the thoughts and comments from other council members. I do, just to summarize, I do think we need to be consistent with the integrity of the policy. And the intent is, as Mr. Johnson laid out, to minimize the work, but you can't overlook the intent to ensure planning entitlements are enforced and that the conditions of permits are met. In this case, I don't know that they were not met or they were not significant, but that is the intent. I would support a reduction, certainly to what staff recommends, and beyond it, more commensurate with the actual work that was done.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilkinson.
So I think I looked at this in a slightly different way, but we've had a number of these appeals come to us recently, and I think our approach has always been to be fair. We're not trying to be punitive, and to see that the homeowner did their best good faith effort to accelerate the process as much as possible to complete the project. It sounds like that was for the most part achieved, and I'm not so much paying attention to this. Did they receive the letter? Did they file their completion, etc.? The bit that's sort of the gaping piece for me is this 10-month medical delay, which seems a very valid reason to me for the project running for a longer timeline than anticipated, and something that was outside of the homeowner's control. And I think in general, when that's the case, we shouldn't be imposing punitive fines. So on the basis that that was a 10-month delay, my sense would be that we should not be imposing any fine at all. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Cooper.
I don't really have anything to add to that. As I said, I think it's going to be worth, as Councilmember Wilkinson said, we seem to be getting these more often, and so, or it feels that way anyway. And so I think one of the things from the retreat was looking at our planning and building processes. And I think that this shows how much that's needed and how we need to move forward with that as soon as possible. So I probably would agree with Councilmember Wilkinson that at this point, I would be fine with no fines added, but if you feel that the day and a half or whatever, I would support that as well.
Thank you. I don't have a lot to add. I am focused on the notice issue. I take the point from Vice Mayor Mark that the letter says that it was posted on the job site on the same day that it was mailed by registered mail. At the same time, I do think there is import in following and allowing our community to rely on the standards for notice. And in this case, the status of the record here is that that letter was not received until August 24. And the standards that we focus on for this kind of an appeal are items that are beyond the control of the applicant, and whether that is a medical delay caused a switch in contractors or the failure to receive notice or any proof that the letter was received before August 24, that occasions a 44 30-day delay. And the record seems pretty clear that the amount of work that took place after the 30-day grace period letter was sent out was 8 to 10 days in terms of a timeline, and probably 1 or 2 days worth of work at most. And so when I look at the principles behind this, which is minimizing the impact of construction on the community and on neighbors, and factors beyond the control of the applicant, I would be inclined to impose no fine here at all. That is to grant the appeal and to reduce it down to 0. I say that with all great respect to and adherence for the standards that we all have to apply and that we do apply when we get these appeals, and our need to be consistent and fair and principled in our application of these rules. But I think in this instance, I would support eliminating the fine altogether. And I don't know, Vice Mayor Mark, if you have a different view.
No. I'm more than fine with that.
All right. The only thing I would say is that, well, it sounds like we're all headed in that direction. I would entertain a motion adopting the resolution, but there are 2 whereas clauses on the first page. And they cite the basis for the delay, which includes the effects of COVID on the pandemic. I would propose that we strike that and refer only to the medical emergency and also to the failure to receive actual notice of the letter in a timely manner. It's the 5th whereas clause from the top.
Does that whole resolution even work? Because that's an affirmation of the subcommittee penalty. So the whole resolution itself.
It's adopted in a slightly, it's phrased in a slightly strange way throughout because it allows us to modify the appeal in its entirety or modify the penalty in its entirety. Perhaps we can just have a motion that grants the appeal, reduces the fine to 0, and that we prepare a resolution thereafter. All right.
I can make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah, second.
Thank you. Can we call the roll, please?
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkinson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mark, Mayor Lynch.
Yes, thank you.
The ayes have it. The motion is adopted 4-0 with Councilmember Knitzer absent.
Thank you. Let's turn now to scheduled agenda item 5B, adopting resolution amending the city's master schedule of fees, charges, and application fees. Is there a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Lynch. During the February 13th regular council meeting, City Council approved the contract amendment for the city attorney's office. The amendment included increases to the hourly billing rates for 3 categories of legal services: the city attorney's standard rate, the litigation rate, and the planning department rate for cost recovery. The planning rate is a direct pass-through for services related to the review of private project applications, CEQA, and other items. Changing this hourly rate requires a revision to the master schedule of fees and a public hearing. I'll point out that the new rates are being adjusted to align Belvedere's hourly rate for cost recovery to more closely match our neighboring jurisdictions that are also clients of Renee Public Law Group. Pending council's approval, the new rates will be effective 60 days from today. And I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Zadnik at this time?
Just real quick, you said the rates be effective 60 days from the date. Would the billing reflect that same schedule?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Negotiate with them.
All right, any other questions? I don't have any. We can open up the public comment period. Is there anyone here who wishes to address that issue? I'm not seeing any. We'll take a look and see if there's any hands raised on Zoom for this topic.
I'm not seeing any hands raised on this topic.
All right, then we will close the public comment. Thank you. We'll bring it back to council for any discussion, or if there are no questions or discussions, perhaps we can entertain a motion.
I'm happy to make a motion to adopt resolution amending the city's master schedule of fees, charges, and application fees.
Second.
Thank you. Can we call the roll, Mr. Zednick? Thank you.
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Chemnitzer. She is absent.
It's getting late.
Councilmember Wilkinson.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mark
Yes.
and Mayor Lynch.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're fired as city clerk.
All right, so that matter passes 4-0 with one absent. Let's turn now to agenda item 6, other schedule items. And we'll begin with 6A, which is to receive a presentation on the fiscal year mid-year budget review and adopt a resolution amending that budget for fiscal year 22 to 23. Can we have a staff report, please?
I'll just bring up my slide real quick. So good evening, Mayor Lynch and council members. This mid-year budget review is for our current fiscal year 22-23. Also included in your packet tonight are detailed capital project sheets to provide you with an update on various projects around the city. My presentation will give a brief overview of the city's budget as of January 31st. As you are aware, the mid-year budget review is an important feature of the budget process as it gives the council and the public an opportunity to review the city's financial status and ensure we are on track to meet our budgetary goals, as well as provide fiscal transparency. Here are some highlights of this year's budget so far. The budgeted beginning general fund balance was $4.7 million. However, a $1.19 million transfer to the critical infrastructure was made at the end of last fiscal year per the reserve policy, which reduced the actual general fund beginning balance to $3.58 million. The city's largest liability is pension funding. The city began seeding the Section 115 trust in April of 2021 with total contributions of $2.1 million. However, investment losses due to difficult market conditions this past year have reduced the balance to a little over $1.89 million. The goal of this trust is for full funding of the city's pension liabilities. Revenues and expenditures are expected to be at about 58% of budget for this time in the fiscal year. Total revenues are currently exceeding those expectations at 67% of budget, and expenditures are at 54% of budget for this point in the fiscal year. As I mentioned, revenues should be at approximately 58% of budget. As you can see, the total revenues overall are currently at $6.74 million or 67% of budget. The general fund revenues mainly consist of property taxes, making up the largest share at $3.9 million. The capital improvement fund revenues are higher due to road impact fees coming in strong at $180,000 already this fiscal year, and receiving grant revenues from the Department of Water Resources grant reimbursements related to the levy evaluation project of a little over $200,000. This grant has around $50,000 remaining and will be completed this fiscal year. The other revenue funds are trending close to projected amounts and are expected to meet the budgetary estimates. So on to expenditures. Total expenditures overall are at $5.95 million or 54% of budget. The general fund expenditures are at 3.7 million or 58%, which is right on track for this point in the year. The capital improvement fund is trending lower. However, we are anticipating some of the projects to begin in the coming months as some projects were delayed due to weather. And just a reminder that the project sheets are a snapshot as of January 31st and do not reflect the scheduled work that is anticipated to occur this spring. Some of the larger upcoming projects are paving and traffic safety, as mentioned in the city manager's report. The equipment replacement fund reflects the purchase of the Tesla 3 for the police department and completion of the office system technology upgrades that included server consolidation and upgrades and replacement of staff computers to increase the stability of the city's technology systems. And this brings us to a summary of the general fund. In December of 2021, the council modified the general fund reserve policy to be calculated based on forecasted expenditures rather than current year expenditures. Also, as part of this new policy revision, at the end of each fiscal year, any unassigned funds that remain in the city's general fund after all other funds have been classified would be transferred to the critical infrastructure reserve and assigned. As mentioned earlier in this presentation, at the end of fiscal year 21-22, 1.19 million in unassigned revenue was transferred to the critical infrastructure reserve, thereby reducing the general fund actual beginning balance to 3.58 million from the fiscal year 23 original budgeted beginning balance of 4.74 million. With this policy change, it eliminated any cushion that existed in the beginning fund balance and resulted in a reduction of the estimated ending fund balance on June 30th to be 2.94 million. So the current picture of the general fund reserve looks like this. As you can see, the estimated ending fund balance as of June is anticipated to be 2.94 million. The fiscal year 23-24 projected general fund expense plus fire transfer plus debt service is 7.91 million. The reserve goal is to be 50% of this amount at 3.95 million. And as you can see, if no budget amendments are made, we'll be under the policy goal by a little over 1 million or 37%. So in order to bring the budget back into alignment, staff is proposing the following budget amendments. To eliminate the budgeted transfer of 600,000 to the critical infrastructure fund and eliminate the budgeted transfer of 19,000 to the road impact fee fund, since this revenue source has already exceeded budget for this point in the year, and add a transfer of 300,000 from the general fund to the insurance and legal reserve to cover current litigation that requires additional resources outside of the city's insured risk and meet the reserve limit of 250,000 for this fund that was approved by council in September of 2022. And finally, a transfer of 700,000 back to the general fund reserve from the critical infrastructure reserve. And with these proposed budget amendments, transfers from the general fund would be reduced from 2.82 million to 1.8 million and result in a revised estimated general fund ending balance of 3.96 million. And with council approval of the staff recommendation, the general fund reserve will once again be in alignment and meet the city's reserve policy goal. Staff is also proposing in item 6B of tonight's agenda to revise the APM section 2.2 fund balance reserve policy to eliminate section 2.2.3 excess fund reserves. This section of the policy was implemented in anticipation of the passage of Measure D and is no longer applicable. The unassigned fund balance would remain part of the city's general fund reserve at fiscal year end. And I did want to mention that the proposed budget amendments have been reviewed and recommended to council by the Finance Committee at their meeting last week. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Helga. Do you have any questions for Helga at this time?
I have
Yes.
Thanks, Helga, and I appreciate all the work that went into this. Even I could understand it. One question I had is, you wrote that most over-the-counter revenues, such as business licenses, do we have business licenses?
Any business that does business in
Oh, okay.
the
Okay.
city has to
Okay.
pay the $160.
Oh, okay. And then in following that, it said that we try to have a 90% cost recovery for building and planning departments. And your report says we're at 82%. So is that just because it's partway through do you anticipate that in the whole year we'll cover it, or that there'll be a larger gap?
You know, the reason we're about 82% is because staff at the beginning of the first 6 months was working on the housing elements.
Oh,
So
right.
we had more expenditures with our MIG consultants. So
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions for her at this time? All right, thank you, Ms. Cotter. That was really thorough and well done. Appreciate it. We'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to address this agenda item? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk, do we have any hands raised on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. Looking over at the attendees, with 4 attendees, there are no raised hands.
All righty, thank you. We'll close the public comment and bring it back to council for any discussion or deliberations. Councilmember Wilkinson.
Okay, so I will kick off here. Both Peter and I attended the Finance Committee meeting as the council reps, and we had a really thoughtful, thorough discussion around this budget, the change in the movement of funds out of the critical infrastructure reserve, and the general changes to the reserve policy, which I know we'll discuss next. And I think there was full support for all of these items. There was a detailed discussion about the importance of maintaining some funds in the critical infrastructure reserve in the short term, just to make sure that we have funds if there are any additional emergency repairs that are needed to the existing infrastructure on San Rafael Avenue or Beach Road. And so that 0.89 million, I think, my view certainly is that that should remain in place. And I think that was the view of the Finance Committee. One thing that we were asked to do, and we are exploring, is looking at the possibility of acquiring earthquake insurance for those two levies. We have no idea whether that's possible and whether it would be useful to use funds from that critical infrastructure reserve to fund that insurance if we find that that is possible and financially affordable. But otherwise, I support all of the aspects of the proposal that Helga's put forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Cooper.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Mark.
No, I think Sally addressed it very well and characterized the conversations from the Finance Committee. I have a comment relating to this, but it's better addressed in the next item, so I'll do it then. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. And I don't have any comments other than to thank Vice Mayor Mark and Council Member Wilkinson and the Finance Committee and Ms. Cotter for very extensive, thorough, detailed work. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'll entertain a motion on the resolution.
I'll make the motion to authorize a budget amendment to revise the fiscal year 2022-2023 budgeted transfers.
Second.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember Wilkinson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mark,
Yes.
Mayor Lynch.
Yes.
The ayes have it and the motion is adopted 4-0 with Councilmember Kimitzer absent.
Thank you. Let's turn now to agenda item 6B. Is to adopt a resolution approving an amendment to the Administrative Policy Manual 2.2. Ms. Cotter, I think we turn to you for a staff report again.
I will. Thank you, Mayor. So the item before you is a proposed amendment to Administrative Policy Manual, Policy 2.2, the Fund Balance and Reserve. As mentioned in the previous discussion, APM Policy 2.2, Fund Balance and Reserve was revised in the December 2021 in anticipation of the passage of Measure D, adding Section 2.2.3 Excess Fund Reserve, whereby any unassigned fund balance at the end of the fiscal year would be transferred to the Critical Infrastructure Reserve from the general fund. However, this eliminates any cushion that exists in the general fund's beginning balance the following year. Since Measure D is no longer applicable, staff is recommending the elimination of this policy. Any unassigned fund balance would remain as part of the city's general fund reserve at the fiscal year end. It is important to keep in mind that the Critical Infrastructure Reserve is for future critical infrastructure projects, both planned and emergency repairs. This is not a defunding of the Critical Infrastructure Reserve, but only a change in the process for allocation of excess fund balance at the fiscal year end. This change allows staff to project the budget more accurately during the budget process and only changes the timing of the moving of any excess reserves. So moving forward, the Finance Committee will review staff recommendations for use of any excess reserves in conjunction with the audit review, and those recommendations will be brought to Council. This policy change was reviewed and recommended to Council by the Finance Committee. And with that, I take any questions.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for Ms. Cotter at this time?
Just a purely administrative question. You had it in the Finance Committee. Is it, I understand 2.23 is going away, but wouldn't it be easier to show it with lines crossed through in the attachments just going forward? I mean,
Oh,
just as a way to make it more clear what's happening.
oh, I thought it was struck out, but yeah, I'll make
Yes.
sure. next
Okay,
time.
wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, we'll open public comment. Is there anyone here in the room who'd like to address this agenda item? I don't see anybody. Madam Clerk, do we have any hands raised on Zoom?
Thank you, Mayor. Seeing 3 attendees, no raised hands.
All right, thank you. We'll close the public comment and bring it back. Is there a motion?
Can I make one quick comment?
Oh, excuse me. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely support this, this resolution to eliminate this section of the policy manual. Basically, it removes the default nature of a automatic transfer of unassigned funds. But we did discuss, and it is important, I think, that and we heard quite a lot this fall, that in relation to critical infrastructure, that why hadn't the city been putting aside a little money every year for a project that it knew long-term was going to be on the horizon. So following the recommendation of the Finance Committee to absolutely take out the default nature of that assignment, but that through the audit process that the Finance Committee has already committed, as you mentioned, Helga, thank you, to address this and make a recommendation of any excess funds to be put into a critical infrastructure fund for known and unknown projects in the future. No, am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I'm going to clarify that. I
Okay,
think
please do.
I think the agreement was that we would look at any excess reserves as part of the audit and decide whether to make any recommendations to allocate a portion of that to the critical infrastructure reserve or pension funding or anything else that might be an additional add-on for the year.
Yes. Thank you for the clarification.
Any other comment or discussion on this item before we entertain a motion?
I'm happy to move the revision to Administrative Policy Manual, Section 2.2, Fund Balance and Reserve Policies.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I can second that.
Can we call the roll, please?
Councilmember Cooper,
Yes.
Councilmember
Yes.
Wilkinson,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mark,
Yes, thank
Mayor
you.
Lynch.
Yes.
The ayes have it and the motion is adopted 4-0 with Councilmember Kim Menzer absent.
Thank you. We turn now to agenda item 7, the open forum. Madam Clerk, do you want to read the announcement, please?
Thank you, Mayor. To the attendees who are attending tonight's meeting, once again, if you joined remotely from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device and you wish to comment, we ask that you please select the raise hand icon. If you've called into the meeting, we ask that you please press *9. Once again, when unmute, please identify yourself for the record, and public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. I'm looking over at the attendees with 3 attendees joining us. I do see 2 raised hands. I will go over and unmute Mr. Rothman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. First, I think I want to say that I appreciate very much, particularly, well, the hard work of the committee for the Coyotes and the hard work of everybody. I may agree, I may disagree, but I want you to know that I recognize that you all work very, very hard. And I appreciate also what I would call the humanity that you showed with respect to the appeal of that fine. I hope we're entering a phase in the city of coming together after somewhat, what you might say, coming apart previous year. Finally, I would like to apologize to the mayor because at the previous meeting, and I sent him an email apologizing already once I realized that I had been wrong. At the previous meeting, I had said that he had not allowed for public comment on an item, and I was wrong. And so again, I express my apologies. And again, I want to congratulate the council on its hard work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have other hands raised?
Thank you, Mary. I'm going to go over and unmute Ava.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to thank the council for their diligent work and for listening to all the people who spoke during the Coyote meeting. It was very instructive. It was very revealing. I do want to point out that that meeting took place not too long after a Norfolk Southern train derailed, spewing 1.1 million pounds of vinyl chloride. That's a legitimate environmental disaster. And it was very telling to hear a particular cohort of extremely wealthy Belvedere residents pile into a meeting and profess that, the greatest threat to them was a bunch of coyotes, which, most of us whose families have been in Marin for a long time, it was interesting hearing that. There's a lot going on in the world. At least 2,000 people had to be evacuated because of the floods in Monterey. We are facing severe problems from climate change. So to hear this, this panic over coyotes, it's interesting. That's the kindest way I could put it. I do want to point out that people who work for companies like McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, people whose NPOs are taking money from Charles Koch, they stand on slippery moral ground when they get up and profess that the inconvenience of coyote howling is too much for them. I do want to point out that throughout North American indigenous culture, the coyote has always been revered. It's been an important part of their spiritual life, and that was as true in Marin County as it was anywhere else. So before Bruce Bly and Brian Davis and Mike Rowe and all these men who need $9.2 million homes or $8 million homes or $7 million homes, before they came in here with their big cars and their loud talk and they're calling for snipers, there were people here who lived comfortably with coyotes, even though they didn't have the structural reinforcements that any of these men have. So I question the validity of the concerns. I certainly have to question the lack of, I mean, there's an obvious lack of physical and moral toughness on the part of these fraidy cat men. And I do want to recommend Betty Gerke's Chief Marin. It's an important insight into how better people than us lived with the land without demanding snipers. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have other hands raised on Zoom, please?
Thank you, Mayor. There are no other hands raised.
Thank you. And I should have asked at the outset of this public comment or open forum, rather, whether anyone here in the room wishes to address anything not on the agenda tonight. I'm not seeing anything. So I want to thank everyone. With that, we are adjourned.